webinar session. So just a little bit about myself. So I I completed my degree in marine biology from University Malaysia, Terengganu, Malaysia. And so I've been working at the Datai for 3 years now. So there's a link to the hotel's website and also about the CSR programs that the hotel has been doing. So you can check on the Datai Pledge that is in the hotel's website. Right, so gonna start with my presentation. So yeah, feel free to just ask the questions like what Riza has mentioned just now. Okay. Right, so our topic today is about corals in general, and also it will be broken into 3 parts. So the first part of this presentation is introduction to corals in general, followed by our interactions with the coral reef, or basically the corals and human relationship. And lastly, I will go into corals and coral conservation in Langkawi, and specifically Fish for the Future, which is CSR program under the Datai Pledge. Right. And so this is a few pictures that I like to start off with, because I like to ask this question to everyone that I know of. It's like a conversation starter. So I would ask them what do they think corals are? So during my corporate days, when I was in Kuala Lumpur, a lot of people has answered, they given me answers like they are rocks, they are plants because they are so colorful. So here is what people's perception of corals. And so this is what exactly corals are. They are a group of animals under Cnidaria. So Cnidaria means nettle animals. And today we'll be going into this group of corals, the first group of coral that falls under Anthozoa, corals and sea anemones. So basically that covers the hard corals and also soft corals. So just to give you a brief introduction of what corals are and what groups them into animals. So this is just a general anatomy of corals. They have very simple digestive system. So as you can see here, they are made out of mouth, gastrodermis, stomach, well, of course, tentacles. So that is what make them Cnidaria. So they do have this stinging cells. It's called the nematocysts. Right. And of course, this is also an example of anatomy of hard corals, where they have the septum, theca, basal plate, which makes out of the skeleton of hard corals. So corals, they have this symbiotic relationship with a type of algae. So it's called the zooxanthellae. And so this algae works just like plants, and they harvest the energy from sunlight, and they live in the soft tissues of corals. And this is what gives them colors. So, and I would say this relationship, it's a commensalism relationship, where corals, they provide shelter for this algae, and in return, the algae will provide the corals with the waste in the type of, in the form of nutrients for the corals, right? And so this is a close-up of how corals look like. And so you can see like they have all these tentacles like sticking out of them. And so there's a few species that extend their polyps out during daytime. And while most of the corals, they do that during the absence of the sun, which is in nighttime. So during daytime, the algae will help the corals like with the process of photosynthesis, which provides them with food and oxygen, while during the nighttime, like these corals will extend the tentacles to capture any floating particles or in specifically plankton, just to nourish themselves, and that's how they gain nutrients. And so like we can just like in general like group them into hard and soft corals. So hard corals is where they have this building blocks that is made out of calcium carbonate, which is hard. So that's actually what makes people think that you know, they are rocks, because they are just hard. Like while the soft coral, they are without their skeleton. So next on, we move to different growth forms of corals. So they can be in this few like different forms that we can see, like it can be in the plate forms, branching, massive or encrusting on some substrate, or solitary. So they comes in all shapes and sizes and colors. So that is what we would describe as rainforest of the sea. So moving on, well, what grouped them into animals is that it's because they do have reproductive systems. So there's a few different ways where they can reproduce. It's by sexual reproduction, budding of the polyps, fragmentation, which we can see is more common with the stressor that or disturbance that we have right now in all of the reefs globally. So, and the other one would be sexual reproduction. So there's a video up next. And if you cannot view this video during this presentation, you can actually refer to which will be shared to you after this presentation in a drive. So it's a little bit shaky because this is my own video of massive spawning of corals where they produce gametes. Right. So what you have seen just now, it's gametes that is produced by this a type of branching corals from the genus Acropora. Yeah. So the video has no sound or audio. It's just sound from diving. From the regulator. If you asking that question, right? So those globes or those that you saw, okay, so they are not bubbles. So these are the gametes. I would say like it's a bundle of eggs and sperms produced by the corals itself. So this was taken last year on the east coast of Malaysia in Terengganu, in Bidong Island or Pulau Bidong. So, so this will happen like, it's what we call the mass spawning of corals, like usually 1 or 2 days after the full moon and at night time. So they will have like, of course, like with the release of all these gametes, there's chemical cues that comes with it to signal all the other corals like in the reef to do the same as well. Right, and so like some general, like this is like the growth rate of like, or average, like taken for the growth rate of different corals. So the slow growing ones or the massive corals or the encrusting corals can grow up to like 25 millimeters a year. And while the branching corals can grow up to 20 centimeters per year, but of course this depends on the condition of the water quality, right? And so fun facts, like some fun facts about corals is that, so this is a picture of Great Barrier Reef, it's the only animal structure or like structure that is made by animals that can be seen from upspace, right? So you can search more about yeah, all these images that is available in the web. So moving on. So there is at least 798 species of corals that has been described globally. And Malaysia is part of this coral triangle where it's the most diverse in Southeast Asia. So in coral triangle, there is about 605 species, and Malaysia alone has 550 species out of the total species that has been described worldwide. So, so this include Peninsular Malaysia and also Sabah and Sarawak, which is in Borneo. And the estimated size of the coral reef area in Malaysia is to be at 4,006 kilometers square. So I will go into more like detail right now into Malaysia and followed by corals in Langkawi. So coral reefs of Malaysia is protected under these few acts: Environmental Quality Act, Fisheries Act, Pesticides Act, Plant Quarantine Act, Customs. So we have all these like rules and regulations that is protecting all corals, right? All corals, be it alive or dead, right? So the Department of Marine Park Malaysia manage like almost 240,000 hectares of marine protected areas. So this includes 40 islands in Peninsular Malaysia and some federal territories. And because there's a few different management in Sabah and Sarawak, so in Sabah, it has been updated to, so I have put here 57,533 hectares in Sabah, plus almost 1 million hectare or almost 900,000 hectares, which is the newly gazetted Tun Mustafa Park in the northern tip of Sabah. So right now, Tun Mustafa Park is the largest marine park in Malaysia. So followed by Sarawak. which is managed by the Sarawak Forestry Department, which covers about 206,000 hectares, right? Okay. So this is like some of the socio-economic valuation of what the coral reefs can provide us, or in short, the ecological services that the coral reefs are providing us. So vital food source, of course, all our most of our protein source comes from all this sea or ocean. Prevention of shoreline erosion. So all these corals that we have like this, consists of the hard structured corals, or even like some other sedentary creatures that is in the reef, helps to dissipate like some energy of the sea or the waves, and it protects our shoreline just like the coastal forest is doing for us. Protection of mangrove and seagrass beds, some biochemical properties, research potential, fisheries. So fisheries in this context means like the fish stock in general, like what is providing for the fishing communities, you know, their income or the livelihood that comes with it. And of course, tourism industry. So this could include like diving, snorkeling, or you know, even like for like hotels, like what the Datai is right now. Okay. And moving forward, so I think I'm going into the second segment of I've already gone into the second segment, which is about corals and humans and our relationships, like all of its importance to us. So right now I'll describe like some of those threats that is threatening the coral reef globally. So like one of it, of course, it's the natural phenomenon which we cannot stop. So corals are very, very fragile creatures. So it takes like years or decades or even like millenniums for them to form the reef that we're seeing right now if we have gone snorkeling or diving. And the reef that is like at the Datai Bay right now is estimated to be about 4,000 years old. So it takes them that long to grow into this huge size that we're seeing, but it takes just 1 second, you know, of like human actions to break them apart. So natural phenomenon, hurricanes, storms, typhoon, so and even tsunami. So these are all like natural disasters that comes with a lot of energy, and they just wash up to the shore. So this can easily break like reefs apart. And of course, we have its natural predators in the ecosystem. And one of the most common predator that we could see is crown of thorns starfish. So that's the scientific name. So how this crown of thorns starfish preys upon corals is that it's called the eversion of the stomach, where they spill out all of their stomach and envelopes all these corals. So they will digest the coral tissue outside of the body, and they absorb the juice back. And next we have these snails, Drupella rugosa or Rugos droop sea snail that preys on corals. So so this is how the Great Barrier Reef, like apart from climate change that has killed like most of the corals there, they have seen like outbreaks of this starfish as well. So this is like a picture of how an outbreak would look like. There's a lot of individuals and in like, let's say a meter square of the corals. So how's the pain feel like? I have no idea because I have never stepped on one or even like pricked myself with one. But from what I've heard, it's really painful because crown of thorns starfish is venomous. Right. Rising sea water temperature, which falls under climate change. So this happens when there's a rise in the sea temperature, water temperature. So this is a map of like how it looks like with the very bad episode of thermal stress back in late 2015 to early 2016. So where we were on the highest alert level back then, and this is what had devastated the Great Barrier Reef. And so even then, Malaysia's coral reef was being affected as well, and I've seen it like on the East Coast and also like on this West Coast where the Strait of Malacca is. So how coral bleaching, like the mechanism of it like works is that, remember the symbiotic algae that I have mentioned earlier? So, so it's what provides like food and like oxygen to the corals, right? So this is how the algae look like under microscope in the living tissues. So when corals are stressed, especially by changes in the temperature, or it could be salinity or the pH, right? So what it will do to protect itself is to expel all this algae out from the soft tissues. And so that's how they will lose their colors. And so this is how coral bleaching like looks like. They're all white, but not necessarily dead yet. So if the water quality like goes back into like the normal range where corals can thrive, and yes, they would be able to survive the ordeal. But if this condition prolongs, so I think some as long as like a few months, like up to 6 months, and even like less than 2 months. So if it becomes into this kind of like dire situation where you see bleached corals that is covered by other algae or seaweed, then it's an irreversible damage. So that's how we would, can say for sure that, yeah, we cannot do anything to help the corals, right? So yes, so to answer to that question, when the water quality returns to normal, they can rejuvenate, they can, but it's not 100%, I would say, recovery rate. That depends on, the corals are resilient, like how they bounce back to from the stress that they've been in. Okay, and so this is an example of pictures taken from the Great Barrier Reef. So healthy reef in December 2014, well, dying in a very dire state in February, and yes, pronounced dead in August 2015. So we can see how like short, like all this stress that put them in, and we will have like this kind of irreversible damage of the reef. And coral reef, they are very important because like they house a quarter of the marine life that we know of. Like it could be vertebrates or invertebrates, you know, fishes and all the other creatures out there. And of course, moving on to anthropogenic threats. So destructive fishing methods, fish bombing, which is still being practiced in few countries. So what they do is they will just throw in a bomb and it will just detonate when it's in the water. So what they will do, because like that's where like all these fishermen knows like all these fish are like lives in. So they will just pick up the dead fish after the bombing. And of course, with this kind of fishing method, it will leave the coral reef devastated, all destroyed, like what you can see here. So what's left of once a beautiful reef is all these rubbles that you can see. So made out of dead corals and sand. Trawling, so which is like one of the methods where we are overfishing our ocean as well. So this is a picture of ghost nets. So how trawl nets or trawlers work is that you can see like they have this huge net and with this like kind of like wings on both sides of the net, and they will drop this to the bottom and trawl everything on its path. So nothing can escape from it. So even though like they are targeting fish, of course, that gives them the income or to generate income for the fishermen, but they are destroying like everything that is on its path, and even like some other animals that they're not supposed to catch, like sea turtles or even sharks. Okay. And cyanide fishing. So cyanide, it's a type of like poison. And so usually fishermen, they would use cyanide fishing to catch like some big fish like the giant groupers because they need it alive. So what cyanide would do is like they would use like a small amount or like small dosage just to stun the fish. So it's easier to like catch them alive. But what they do not know of is that since corals are so fragile and sensitive, they end up killing the corals. And of course, like we're moving into like development like of the shoreline, which is happening like globally, worldwide, because that's what generate income for most of the countries. So like with development comes reclamation of land, and of course sedimentation, like going out into the sea. So like we said just now, corals, they need sunlight for the algae to photosynthesize. So once there's this sediments that cover the corals, they smother them or like smother them and even kill them in the process. Shipping. So how shipping would affect corals in general, because so all these vessels, they are coming from different parts of the world, and of course they will bring along like some of these species that doesn't belong to the environment or the waters where they dock. So sometimes they might bring along some invasive species or alien species, which could be quite devastating. And So like, for example, like how this would turn into a disaster is when they release all this ballast water into, like, let's say our Malaysian shore, and they bring along this type of plankton or some type of algae, and with the help of some nutrient in the water, and they just bloom. So they could use up like the oxygen in the water, and they would just grow like on the surface and blocking out sunlight. So the corals can die from eutrophication, a form of eutrophication, right? And of course, oil spills, okay? So there's been quite a bad episodes of oil spill like across the world. So it's not just like killing corals, like which cannot move away, you know, from the affected area, but it's killing all the other animals like that that is within the polluted area as well. And of course, tourism. So these are some examples of pictures where I got across the internet. And so like I said just now, like when I first introduced to you like what corals are, so people think that they are rocks, and whenever they go and visit some places, they think they should leave a mark, right? So this is what they do, vandalizing corals. So hopefully, you know, like with more education and engagement programs like what we're doing right now, people would realize that they're actually hurting or you know, destroying some other animals, right? And of course, tourists, they are just like stepping all over corals when they just like go into the water, because like most of the time from what I can observe is that they are not so confident like while they're in the water, so they just trample upon like some shallow areas and just step on corals. So remember like how like corals can take up to millennials to grow into like the size of this first picture on the left. So it just takes like just a fraction of a second for them like to break them off. And yeah, it would take all these corals like thousands of years like to build themselves up again. Right, so moving into like corals in Langkawi. So Langkawi is an archipelago of 104 islands. And out of all these islands that we have here, we only have Pulau Payar, that is a marine park. So, yeah. And let's see. Right. So in Langkawi, from a few journals that I came across, so there are about, or at least 39 species of hard and soft corals in Langkawi waters. Well, at least 108 reef fish species. And some of those sites which, or the study sites that was published in this paper has about 50 to 70% of live coral cover, right? But in Langkawi, in general, the water here, like we have a serious issue of sedimentation. So sedimentation is a major threat in Langkawi. That's due to the geographical location of Langkawi, that is in Strait of Malacca. So there's a lot of rivers like from Peninsular Malaysia and also Indonesia that wash into this strait, and also like Strait of Malacca being the busiest strait in the world for all these cargoes and vessels that where east meets the west and vice versa. So, so these are like some of those excerpts that I can find like or documented artificial reefs in Langkawi. So these are all deployed by the Department of Fisheries of Malaysia from 2009 to 2015. These are a few locations that is in Langkawi with the amount of artificial reefs and what type are those? So concrete or soft bottom reef. So we have a soft bottom artificial reef in Langkawi due to the heavy sedimentation here. So that's why like what you can see in the pictures right here, some are concrete, and the first picture on the top left corner, that's actually steel. So like what you can see like on the first row of the pictures where it looks like a small little building or small little structure. Describing about the Datai Pledge CSR program of the hotel. And so Datai Pledge has 4 pillars under this program. So the first one is Pure for the Future, which mostly about the sustainable practices or green practices that is in the hotel itself. And Fish for the Future, which I will be going through to you in just a short while. Wildlife for the Future, and Youth for the Future. So Wildlife for the Future would focus on terrestrial creatures on land, and Youth for the Future is what connects me to all of you who are attending this webinar right now, right? Fish for the Future, like a little introduction of like how we came up with this program. So my hotel, the Datai Langkawi, sits in this bay here. So the Datai Bay is, we have like quite a rich biodiversity right here. And a study that was published in 2017 has cited that the Datai Bay has one of the richest marine biodiversity in all of Langkawi. So here are some of the coral cover that was done like in previous studies. So you can see here like the live coral cover in this bay here has been like in the status of fair to good. So with about like 40% in average. So
I think you are frozen, Nicole.
YRE Malaysia with long like lakes, because it has to settle at this soft bottom. And so after 3 months, so this is how it looks like underwater. And here's another video. With like all the fish that has already been like attracted to these structures. So that will serve like artificial habitat or shelter, or even like provide food for all these fish. So that's what attract the fish to come and aggregate. Okay. So after a year, so this was taken just a few months ago, and this is how it looks like right now. So apart from barnacles that is attached themselves on the structure itself, like there are other like invertebrates like bryozoans, even like algae or seaweed. And what we would love to see, like all these like white structures that you can see right here, these are corals. They've been recruited on the structure itself without us like, you know, doing active transplantation on this structure. So that's what we hope to happen. And these are the pictures like of corals that I've taken like from the structure itself. So after a year, it has grown like up to like 2-3 centimeters like in diameter of like each of the polyp right here. So hopefully, you know, like with time, it can become another habitat for the marine creatures. Right. And we also have this rehabilitation and restoration, which where we would use this so-called coral of opportunity. So coral of opportunity is defined as hard corals. Another term to describe them is scleractinian corals. So that has been detached from its main colony by natural processes like storms, tsunami or typhoon, hurricanes, or unknown events. So in this term, we will describe them as human activities like fishing or even anchoring from boats, you know, when they lodge or drop their anchor like in a reef area. So they would damage the corals in the process. And of course, like if all these like fragmented corals, most of it like that got dislodged from its main colony, some may survive if they are in a very good, you know, condition or habitat. But I would say like in some other places where there's a lot of like human activities, the mortality rate is very high. And I would say like most of the papers would cite that they would perish, all these fragmented corals would perish without any intervention. So what Fish for the Future would use in this step of rehabilitation is that we would rescue all these fragmented corals and put it in a coral nursery. Right, so this is how the coral nursery looks like at the Datai. So yes, we would go out to collect these fragmented corals. So it can be any corals. It can be the branching corals. It can be some of those massive or encrusted corals or in any forms. Rehabilitate them in these tanks and then restore them or transplant them back into the sea. So this coral nursery would be like a transit center, I would say, or rehab center, and they wouldn't spend like their lifetime in these tanks. So they would be transplanted back into the reef. So where this reef is that just right in front of the beachfront, where we have a small patchy coral habitat with just about 18% of live coral cover because of like most of the sedimentation going on. So this would be like an example of how we're going to transplant the corals back. And community outreach as well. So this is part parcel or like one of the elements of Fish for the Future. Our main collaborators would be the fishing community and also like related agencies and schools. So fishing community, so I was like engaged with all this fishing community in Langkawi Island. So from this platform, it's called Ecosystem Approach to Fisheries Management. That was introduced, first introduced in this program for Coral Triangle, in Sabah. And so here are a few villages or head of fisheries base that we've been engaging since 2018. So it's an ongoing process. And so these are the schools that we have adopted. Sekolah Rendah Ewal, a primary school, and then Sekolah Menengah Kebangsaan Tunku Putra, a secondary school, which we have adopted or sponsored through Youth for the Future, which is under the CSR programs or under the Datai Pledge. And of course, we'll be engaging with other schools as well through our NGO partners. So for Fish for the Future, we are partnering with Mariset, an NGO that specializes in marine mammal studies in Malaysia. And of course, other related agencies is the main collaborator would be the Department of Fisheries, because we need them to approve some of our programs. And of course, to enforce some rules and regulations in around Langkawi waters as well. So we've been engaging with them in the district level, the state level, and in federal level. So Marine Park and also Fisheries Research Institute. So we have just started this partnership with the Fisheries Research Institute because they would like to study about how the galvanized steel artificial reef could, or what's the improvement, or what's the difference between the galvanized steel structures with their concrete structures, right? And that's all for my presentation, and I hope you have enjoyed that and learn a bit more about corals in Malaysia and also Langkawi. And so I think I'm 5 minutes over my time. So right now we'll be going into a Q&A session.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Nicole. That was very informative. Also, it was so nice to see the chat so active with so many people participating. We're going to be doing a quick Mentimeter little quiz. So I'm going to share my screen. If you have your phone with you or a laptop, you can go onto menti.com and then use the code 5998 to join this quiz. And we will give people a few seconds to join, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, Nicole, maybe you can talk a bit about the prize awaiting the winners.
Oh, okay. So I know there's a lot of participants coming from all over the world, but I have this prize. So for those who can answer some of the questions. So what I have here is a nice glass water bottle with the hotel's logo on it. So I have 3 of these flasks to be given away. Yeah.
Disclaimer, it's only for Malaysian because, we're trying to be eco-environmental friendly. So Or the
we want to
traveling cost.
Yeah, no, we want to reduce our carbon footprints as much as possible. So yeah, so this prize is only available for students in Malaysia. So yes, grab your chance.
And begin. You should have 20 seconds to answer each question.
So Shahira, what are the conditions for them to win this? Like they need to give their name and their...
Yeah, since we're going to allow all participants to enjoy it, and the prizes is only going to be given to Malaysian students, so you have to put your details at the end of the name, your countries, so it's easier for us to reach out to you later.
You should have 5 seconds left to answer the first question. Oh, excellent. So the correct answer to that, why are reef building corals limited to shallow waters, is due to the symbiotic algae in corals require light for photosynthesis. Next question. Current leaderboard.
Oh, wow.
Oh. All right.
Okay, go for it, Noor and Nisa.
We have more questions awaiting you, so anybody can still grab the leaderboard.
Probably not. Okay, that's all the questions.
Oh, wow.
Not sure how that happened. But this is our leaderboard. So well done, Noor and Nisa. For the Q&A, if you have any questions from the audience, now's the time to ask. Type them in and Nicole will try to answer them.
Yep. Okay, I'm just scrolling through like from the, in the chat. So maybe I can look up like some of those questions that I didn't notice while I was doing the presentation.
We do have one here. How much time does it take for coral to grow?
How much time?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so for corals like to grow as big as the Great Barrier Reef, that would take like millions of years. So like say just now, like corals, they do grow like really, really slow. Although like even for the branching corals that can grow up to 20 centimeters a year, that is like in a very ideal condition.
Mm-hmm.
So like depends on the quality of the water, they can grow a bit slower. And on top of that, like, you know, they have to deal with competition. Like with other creatures as well, like even like branching corals and like those massive corals that we have seen just now, like there's competition going on between them as well because they compete for space, right? So yeah, it takes a very, 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 very long time for corals to grow. So just be mindful, like the next time you visit a reef, be mindful not to step on them and handle them or just see them from a safe distance.
All right. Another question, how can we raise awareness for students to be more mindful of coral preservation? I guess, be careful, don't step on them.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, for students. So let's pick an example of like what's like in Malaysia right now. I think we don't really have a subject on, you know, conservation. So, but I would say like a lot of like the NGOs, like non-governmental organizations, are doing great job in raising awareness. So there's like continuous activities and programs that expose students to all the efforts that's been going on around the globe. And yes, so I think like with, you know, most of the access that we have, like even for like students, young kids or children, they have like access to the internet. So it would be like a good platform for them, like to find out more about corals in general.
Another question that I've seen in the chat and here as well is the difference between artificial coral and the natural coral. Is one more sustainable than others? Is it different? What can you tell us about that?
All right, so let's see. Artificial corals means, do you mean this by the artificial reef, or the man-made structure, or just like corals like transplanted by, you know, like through conservation programs? So there's a little bit of not so clear. So, okay, I just assume that this person is asking about those that are being transplanted versus the natural corals that is in a reef. So with the trend right now, because like a lot of the conservation programs, they are just using like maybe just from one group of corals or from this genus, Acropora, which is the branching corals and grows the fastest. And so they might be just transplanting or restore just one species of corals in a certain habitat or in an ecosystem. So this might pose a risk because like we want to maintain or keep the diversity of the ecosystem as well, so that they are much more resilient compared to like just one or mono-species. And let's say like if there's an unknown disease, it could be a bacteria or parasite that comes and infect the reef. So it can wipe out the whole population, like what we can see like in plantation or in farms, because we are just like planting like a type of vegetables, and then like there's this disease. So it could wipe out like everything, and then like we are left with nothing at all. So of course, like a natural reef or natural corals that is in a certain habitat, they dwell or they thrive well in that surrounding, because like there's already a precedence, right? So I hope that answered that question.
Absolutely. We have unfortunately run out of time, so I'm going to end that there. Thank you very much, Nicole, for joining us.
Thank you, Riza.
And thank you to all the participants. If you would like a diploma for participation, put it in the chat right now. Shairul, if you want to say anything else before we end.
Yes, because of the earlier technical difficulty, so we're going to share a Kahoot link for us to find the winners. Is it possible for us to extend a bit?
Sure.
Sure, okay, great.
It's up to the audience if they stick around.
Yeah, so Marquis will be doing it now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I'm Sri from YRE Malaysia. So sorry for the technical error, especially for the quiz. I know everybody wants some gift. So yeah, so our YRE team will send a link in your chat space. so that you can participate in the quiz. So then we will analyze the winner from the Kahoot. So please hold on, yeah? So just wait for the chat space message to pop up. Then you can click the link, then you can answer the questions.
In the meantime, Nico, I think maybe you can answer a few more questions by the audience.
Okay. Biggest challenge with Fish for the Future project. Right. I would say like working with the like some communities here, because like we really need to like keep on like the conversation going on or the engagement going on. So that involves like a lot of parties, and some might be cooperative and some may not. So I think like the hardest part would be like the human aspect for this conservation program, right? Let's see. What other questions? Okay, what happens if we lose coral reefs? So if we lose the coral reefs like around the world, that's a very big problem like to us all, because like we will lose like our main source of protein. Like a lot of people will lose their livelihood because they get their income, or like find ways to put food on the table from the coral reef itself. So like, it could be like they're fishing, just to put food on the table, like for the families, or even they can sell it, to get some income. And of course, how I mentioned like before this, like it houses like a quarter, 25% or even more of all the marine creatures that we know of, that is like living in this planet. So without them, like all these animals would have no shelter, no breeding ground, no foraging ground. So what we may see now, like we might not get to see like all of these like creatures if coral reefs are like wiped out from the surface of the earth.
Okay, guys, sorry for the delay. Okay, so please put your name and your contact details if you can. And of course, your countries of origin, so we can identify the winners and we can just simply reach out to you later. So please join, please go to kahoot.it and enter the game pin. Oh yeah, Nico, there's one question there. What was your most rewarding moment with the project?
My most rewarding moment. I would say like when we deployed that artificial reef last year in 2019, because we've been like, getting like a lot of approvals like from like the state government, like the federal government, from Department of Fisheries. So that process took like 2 years plus for that to happen. So I would definitely say like that's the most rewarding moment from last year. So maybe like after this, there will be more rewarding moments coming on in the short term. So hopefully I get to share it again for those who are interested. Right, so are people registering like for the quiz?
Yes, for the real quiz.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Riza, you can do wrap up now.
Sure.
Yeah.
For those of staying with the quiz, we will let you know about the winners.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we will update in the YRE Malaysia Facebook who are the winners. So please wait for the results. By tomorrow afternoon, the results will be out. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so we will start now. Okay, congratulations to A. Muhaimin, Jonathan, and Norelia Najwa. Please please email one of us, one of the hosts, your details so we can contact you later. And I am sorry for those that is unable to join our session today in our Kahoot session because of all the technical difficulties, but I really can't do anything about that because, you know, it's really on the web. We have Reza in Scotland, we have Nicole in Langkawi, so it's kind of things that tends to happen. So with that, I would like to express my gratitude to Reza YRE International for allowing us to YRE Malaysia to host this webinars, and of course Nicole for her willingness to share her knowledge, her various knowledge on corals. I hope that the participants will get to know better about corals. And again, I'm sorry. I represent YRE Malaysia. Would like to apologize if your experience is not up to your satisfaction. But in the upcoming webinars on the 23rd, Hornby Conservation, we will try to improve our terms of conditions and services. So stay tuned. Nicole, is there any final words that you want to share with the audience?
Well, thank you so much for the attention, guys, and thanks for having me here. It's been really amazing, for the audience to be so engaged with the topic as well. And thank you so much, everyone, for organizing a webinar session. Yeah.
Reza, is there anything else that you want to share with the audience?
Thank you to everyone, audience, YRE Malaysia, Nicole. It was an excellent session, and I'm looking forward to the next one. And I'm going to close this webinar now.
Yes.
So have a good rest of your evening, day, wherever you are in the world.
Enjoy your day.
Enjoy. Bye.